My strict father disapproved of the man my sister was marrying, so he made it his ultimate mission to make their wedding day a living hell. When my father found out my sister was marrying Tom, he declared war on her wedding day, making it his ultimate mission to ruin every last detail of it. Dad had never liked Tom. In fact, he didn't like anyone Lucy dated. The fact that Tom was a tech guy who worked in a startup instead of, say, being an orthopedic surgeon or a lawyer was enough to make Dad scoff. Every time Lucy brought up her relationship with Tom, Dad would mutter things like, "He's just not good enough or this marriage won't last more than a year." It was as though he believed that unless Tom came with a trust fund and a family crest, Lucy was doomed to failure. Dad's passive-aggressive disapproval was a slow burn. It started with little comments about Tom's job. "I just think your fiancé should have a more stable career." Dear turned into, "He doesn't even own a home. What's he gonna do when you're both homeless?" Then came the unsolicited advice about the wedding itself. Why not have the ceremony in a garden? "You know, I think a country club would be more appropriate. It's a family tradition, you know?" We didn't have any family tradition, but Dad was convinced he was a wedding expert. But it wasn't until the actual wedding day that Dad went full evil villain mode. The first sign that things were going awry came when I woke up to find Dad pacing around the living room in a tuxedo, looking like he was about to run a marathon rather than attend his daughter's wedding. "This wedding's a disaster," he muttered, not noticing that I was standing right behind him. "Tom's going to ruin her life, and she'll thank me one day." "What are you doing, Dad? Are you ready to go?" I asked, trying to get him to focus on something other than the impending doom he had already decided would unfold. But Dad wasn't having it. He was too busy practicing his speech to the guests about how Tom wasn't good enough to marry Lucy. "I just want them to know," he mumbled. "It's for her own good." I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. He was treating this like an intervention instead of a wedding. The ceremony was set to start at 2 p.m., and we were all waiting in the church. Lucy was radiant, glowing in her dress, and Tom looked like he was about to burst from excitement. The tension in the air was palpable, but not because of any nerves from the bride and groom. It was all because of Dad, whose mission was now clear. He wasn't going to let this wedding go off without his stamp of approval. The church door swung open, and Dad entered like he was the star of a reality TV show. He walked Lucy down the aisle with such deliberate slowness, it seemed like he was trying to stall the wedding. He whispered something to her as they passed me. "You sure about this, kid? You're better off with someone who knows what real work is like." Lucy smiled through clenched teeth, but I could see her jaw twitching. She was starting to snap. The real mess started when it was time for the vows. Everything was going smoothly. Lucy was up there, looking like an angel, and Tom was practically bursting with joy as he promised his love to her. But just when things were getting emotional, Dad stood up. Everyone froze. "Excuse me," Dad announced loudly enough for the entire church to hear. "I just need to say something." A collective groan went through the crowd. Lucy's eyes widened in horror, but Dad ignored her. He was already on his mission. "Look, Tom," Dad began using the most condescending tone possible. "I've known a lot of people in my day, and I can tell you right now, you're not ready for this marriage. In fact, I'm worried that this is going to end in disaster, and I think we all know it." My jaw dropped. Lucy's face turned crimson. Tom stood there, stunned, like a deer in headlights. The church was silent. My mother intervened and sat my father down. But then, the cake incident happened. After the ceremony, we moved to the reception hall where the cake was waiting to be cut. Lucy and Tom stood in front of it, smiles plastered on their faces as the DJ queued up the music. But just as they were about to slice into it, Dad appeared. "I'm just going to go ahead and cut the cake for you," he announced, winking at the guest like he was the one getting married. I've always had an eye for these things. Before anyone could stop him, Dad took a knife and plunged it straight into the center of the cake, not cutting it in neat slices, but slashing it as if he were chopping down a tree. The cake collapsed under the pressure. Frosting splattered everywhere. It looked less like a wedding cake and more like a car accident. Lucy's eyes went wide, and for a second, I thought she might pass out. Tom stood there in utter shock, looking like he wanted to crawl into a hole. Dad, meanwhile, was wiping cake off his face with a smirk. "Just saving you from a disaster, kid," he said, in what I swear was an attempt at a victory speech. The wedding was far from perfect, but in the end, Lucy and Tom got what they wanted, a day to remember, for better or for worse. And as for Dad, well, let's just say he'll probably be spending the next year reminiscing about the disaster he caused. Maybe he'll feel victorious. Maybe Lucy will hate him forever. Maybe he'll think twice before trying to sabotage anyone else's happiness.